My name is Brandon Bustede. I'm Executive Director for Education and Workforce Development at Gallup, and I have the pleasure and honor of presenting some of the high-level findings from what frankly was an incredibly interesting study that we did. A study conducted by Gallup in partnership with Melissa and Doug, and this stemmed actually from a happenstance meeting that I had with Melissa Bernstein probably 9 months ago, 10 months, it wasn't that long ago. And we had this great energetic brainstorm about things that we ought to know. And one of those topics was how children spend their free time, how parents think about that, how they value it. And so that's the essence of this study. So here's the first key finding, and that is that parents do not necessarily prioritize child-led, unstructured indoor play. We're going to make some distinctions between indoor and outdoor play. And so as you can see here, we asked parents what their preference was for how their child spends their free time, and then we asked them what they think their child's preference is. And good news is there's a lot of alignment between parents and what they think their children prefer around outdoor play. We'll show you a little bit in the future slides about some of the barriers to outdoor play. Largely both value activity with a parent or other adult. You can see there's a little divergence in organized sports, so parents much more likely to prefer that than their kids say, but still a fairly large percentage of parents believe their kids feel that way. Divergence also on other structured activities, right? So music lessons to you name it. And you can start to see indoor screen-free play and indoor screen-free play on their own are kind of in the middle to the end of the pack in terms of preferences for both the adult and the child. The next key finding is that parents downplay the benefits of unstructured child-led play. So this is how we set up the questions. We asked parents, what of these following qualities do you think are most important for children to develop by the age of 10? And in terms of preference, right, the top choice that parents noted was self-confidence, followed by social skills, then academic skills, then discipline. And so those are all between 60 and 40% of parents referencing that. Then it drops off a little bit, 31% for problem solving. It drops down almost another 10 points around creativity. And then you can see some of the others that were part of the options: motor skills, teamwork, resilience, leadership, computer skills. Interestingly enough, problem solving and creativity are the two qualities that parents associate most with the activity of unstructured play. And you can see obviously too that organized sports kind of takes the cake here in terms of parents' opinions of what activities are most associated with the top qualities they're interested in. Organized sports is the top choice on almost every one of these except for problem solving and creativity. So this is interesting that on one hand, parents associate problem solving and creativity with unstructured playtime, but obviously they don't prioritize those nearly as high as things like self-confidence, social skills, academic skills, and discipline. And overall, if parents were voting here, they'd be voting for organized sports as the top driver of all these key qualities. So the next key finding, many parents want a lot more outside play for their children. As you can see, they believe their children prefer outside play too, but they see many barriers to doing it. And I thought this was another interesting finding because when you look at the top reason why they say their children don't play outside more, it was weather. Now, we have to understand that there's probably some real rationale behind that, obviously, as these respondents are thinking about these things. Certainly wasn't surprised to see some of these other things at the top of the list, right? Don't feel safe, concerned about safety, even things like lack of other kids in the neighborhood or just space to play, right? So as we think about these things, there are a lot of reasons why outdoor play is being limited, right? The question is, how many of these are real obstacles, right? What kinds of things might we do to kind of shift these from obstacles or barriers into even opportunities, right? Like playing in the rain. I mean, geez, who does that anymore? So, key finding number 4, when children are indoor, this is not going to surprise everybody, screen-based play edges out unstructured child-led play. And there are significant differentials here, and I'll show you some of the findings here. So First, we have total screen time, which includes all screen time, media, devices, even educational activities online. As you can see, that's the number one choice that parents report in terms of total hours per week that their children spend, followed by outdoor play, indoor screen-free play alone, and indoor screen-free play with others. And as you can see, as children are older, parents report more use of screen time, and as you can see, the hours spent in those other activities slide down. And keep in mind, I mean, we're talking about, 2 to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 10. I mean, these are fairly short time frames in the grand scheme of things, and those hours of screen play are going up pretty significantly. The hours of other time is going down. And it's also the case that parents of older children, 9 to 10-year-olds, for example, are more worried about their child's use of screen time. So, the next key finding is that parents feel compelled to fill their child's downtime. Only 2 out of 10 parents strongly agree that it's good for children to be bored now and then. Just 2 out of 10. And when we ask them what happens when they're bored, what do you do? A third say their first strategy is just to let them figure it out. But there's a lot of other choices that they indicate. So 27% say they talk to them about different activities they might want to do, give them a little guide or nudge. 11% say they stop what they're doing to interact with their kid. And you can see some of the other responses drop down considerably. Set up something else to keep them busy, allow them to watch media or use electronic device. Only about 4% report that. And then I think this is the final key finding I'm sharing. Children are exhibiting behaviors that could stem potentially from a lack of child-led free play. And so what do we mean by this? Parents who report that their children spend less than 3 hours, this was the cutoff, less than 3 hours of screen play per weekday, versus 3 hours or more per weekday. There are significant differences in those parents' feelings about their child's development. So, and also concerns about that. So these were percent of parents who say they're worried about their child not keeping up academically, that they are worried their child has trouble getting along with other children, and that they worry their child is under too much stress. Now, obviously, as we think about these findings, there could be a number of things going on here, right? Are children who are more stressed more likely to turn to screen-based activities, right? I mean, these are important things that we have to unpack in this research. Is this an effect of screen play, or is it potentially an effect of a lack of unstructured free play, right? I mean, so there's a lot going on here in the data, but clearly there is a relationship between parents reporting of these hours on screen time and increased worry about key aspects of their child's development. So I think as we have this conversation, I segue to asking Juju to come to the stage. I think we should think about this through the lens of parenting. For those of us who are parents, I think we should think about this through the lens of societal messages. For those of us who have an opportunity to play a role in that. And I also think we need to think about school time as part of this as well. So with that, I'm delighted to introduce our moderator, Juju Chang. Many of you know Juju because you see her either on Nightline, so she's a co-host of Nightline, was also on Good Morning America, among many other things, and we are absolutely delighted to have her star power lent to this discussion today. She will probably mention this, but she is the mother of 3 boys, preteen and teen, so she has her hands full.
There's so many findings that we can dive into, but the first being, the first key finding was described as the bias towards outdoor play versus indoor play. Let's frame that first, Peter. Why is it that parents hold this outdoor play idea so much higher than indoor play?
Yeah, I think that this is a survey of parents, and where do parents get their ideas? Where do parents get their beliefs about things? They get it from the larger culture around them, from the messages that are always put out, from their pediatricians, so in some sense we have a tendency sometimes to blame parents for their lack of knowledge or their particular beliefs. But if these are the beliefs that are in the air everywhere, then no surprise parents are going to have them. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of messages out there about the value of being outdoors. We're hearing that all the time. There's also a lot of messages about the value of sports. I mean, sports are a huge thing in our culture. There's not a lot of messages about the value of child-led play. And to me, it's even redundant to put child-led in front of the word play, because it's not play if it's not child-led.
Love that.
What play is activity that children structure for themselves. It is how children learn to structure things for themselves. It is how children learn to solve their own problems. It's how children learn to be creative. And even though parents rated these things fairly low, I think because, again, the culture does not present these as the values they should be, these are extraordinarily important things to acquire, especially, as was pointed out in our economy today. You can't make a living out. I mean, robots have taken over all the routine jobs. Google has all the information anybody needs. We don't need people who have a lot of information in their heads. We don't need people who can do a lot of routine jobs. We need people who are creative. We need people who can think of things that haven't been done, think of problems to solve that haven't been solved. And we certainly need problem solvers. So it's interesting that parents acknowledge that problem solving and creativity are created by child-led play, but they didn't acknowledge, I think, in this study how important those abilities are.
So, Melissa, I'm curious if I can ask you to dig into this idea of boredom as an instigator of play. The finding said only 2 out of 10 parents embraced boredom, but you see it as a blessing.
But it's a painful blessing. I had a childhood that was all about boredom, and boredom didn't have a lot of stimulus around me, but the truth is boredom is really painful, and it involves kind of staring yourself in the mirror every day and saying, how am I going to fill my canvas with nothing but my own imagination? And that can be really painful. And I think, today's parents, after reading your book, I realized that I am a directive, protective parent, which means that I have a really hard time with seeing my kids in pain. And my desire, and many parents' desires today, is to fill that void very quickly with something structured for them to do. So that what happens, we think we're doing them a service because we're not allowing them to feel pain and go through the process it takes to fill that canvas, and that filling that canvas every day, when you get used to it, becomes muscle memory, and through that you learn resilience and creativity and the ability to problem solve and fend for yourself. But what's happening with today's parents is, because we're so fearful of kids feeling that pain, and it almost can induce panic attacks in kids who are like, I'm bored, I need something to do. We want to fill it and make them feel better, and we do that. And then we don't enable them to build those skills themselves.
So, how do you work with families, parents? Because, parents blame educators, educators blame parents. It's this sort of feedback loop. But how do you work with parents to get them to value unstructured time? Because you, I know, as part of your menu, provide after-school activities. Right. And so how do you work with parents to value the different types of activities?
I think you have to meet parents where they are, and I think in part because of what you've heard the other presenters speak to already, a piece of what parents are anxious about is wanting to see their kids do well, and whether that's in school or thinking about the long-term trajectory of their child's life, those are sort of ideas that operate at the back of a parent's mind as they're making conscious choices about what they're going to support for their children. So we value the importance of meeting parents where they are, seeking to try and understand what's important to them, and using that as a launching pad for being able to introduce ideas about things that maybe they haven't been exposed to. Maybe there's not been access to knowledge that helps them sort of understand the value of what granting children more latitude around being bored or being able to go outside and play with others, helping them understand what kinds of things are actually happening for children in those moments. So you have to meet parents where they are, because nobody is approaching the task of helping to get children from birth to adulthood in a vacuum. We are all worried about, is my child going to be able to make it? Mm-hmm. And sometimes the messages that society articulates about what it takes to make it feels very much like you better be on a path, and you better get on that path early, because if you don't get on it early, you're not going to be able to find your way. And I think it takes an incredible amount of sort of conscious energy for parents to be directed in that way.
Yeah,
that's like a really important
It's fascinating because
starting
as
point.
a parent, I know, and I've seen a lot of this research trickle out over the years, and I still make the mistake of looking at my children's time as play or enrichment, and not necessarily as both. How do you, Allison, get parents to understand the value of it, of just free play?
Right. Well, I work in a school, and one of the things that we've done is invited parents into the classroom, not just at typical times. Parents, are often invited in. In a lot of places, they're invited in for, a writing celebration or, some kind of celebration. And we've made a conscious choice to invite parents in during different academic and play parts of the day so that the parents can come in and actually see what's going on. And the teachers can give the parents the eyes to see. So they've even given the parents, not just articles when they go off to watch their kids at play, but even little checklists that say, look to see if how your children are negotiating together. Notice what happens when the block structure falls over. Do the children, try again and persevere through that task, and give them that these are the things that are actually happening when they're off playing, and these are some things you can say to your child when they're off playing. So that's one thing. I think inviting them in during that playtime and helping them see what's happening.
Peter, how do you convince educators that this is a wise investment of their assets? Because they've got limited assets, limited budgets, and they're looking at their own revenue streams impacted by these assessments, by these tests. How do you convince educators that it's worth letting the kids go out and run around?
Boy, that's a good question. It's interesting. I think that one of the results from this study, I kind of made a note on this, would be really valuable for educators to know, and that is parents most value, according to this, self-confidence and social skills. But parents apparently don't recognize that self-confidence and social skills are built in child-led free play. And in fact, it's hard to imagine any kind of activity that by its very nature would be building these kinds of skills. I mean, when children are playing together with no adult there, they've got to learn how to get along with one another. That's part of the purpose. That's why natural selection created this strong drive in children to play with other children, because we are social animals. Absolutely right that social skills should be way up there at the top. We've got to know how to get along with other people. But you don't learn that in adult-led skills, because the adults are solving the problems. They're telling you what to do. You learn that. Let's say you and I are kids and we're getting up a game of some kind, and I'm a bit of a bully. I want to do it my way, and I want you to do it my way. And you say, oh, I hear my mom calling, I'm going to go home. Because
That's problem solving.
That's problem solving, and that is the natural consequence to me for not taking your needs into account. This is how children throughout history have learned how to get along with other people. It's partly that throughout human history, children's play was just kind of taken naturally. Of course, children play. They go out and play. That's what children do. And we never really had to justify it. It's just like, fish never really have to talk about water. It's,
That's right.
But now that water's been taken away, and now we fish have to start talking about it. Yeah, this is what children swim in.
What's fascinating to me is the fear that is the overarching barrier to all of it. The parents' fear that the kids are going to be bored and so they have to intervene, or the parents' fear that they can't go outside because it's unsafe. How do parents pull back and allow for that sort of benign neglect to take hold? And why is it that we as parents are constantly trying to program with that after school, you've got to try, boxing because who knows? And you got to try lacrosse because maybe you'll get that scholarship. There's always, not a moment of unstructured time.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about it in your book, all the reasons that parents have felt that way, but I think overall we are very worried that our kids won't be quote unquote successful. And we also fear for their safety, because of media and a whole bunch of other things that are actually, as you say, not true. But because of that, it's led us to want to get much more involved in childhood and orchestrating our kids' lives in a way that we believe will lead them to success. But what we are very clearly seeing now is actually leading them to a whole host of mental health issues that are showing themselves very dramatically in college-age kids right now as a result of not enough self-discovery and play and ability to discover oneself in early childhood.
Because we're talking about play not just for toddlers, but for older kids. Can one of you two, Allison or Tammy, jump in on that?
Yeah.
Older play, even for adults, the idea of play.
Absolutely. Even at fifth graders to see at my school, we opened up a block room, and the kids go in there usually during content area studies, and they recreate things that they've learned about the Native Americans, and they'll go in and they'll build fantastic, the things that they create is absolutely incredible, and they don't realize how much they're learning, not just about the content, but about all of these social skills because they're playing. They're totally 100% engaged in the task, and when you're 100% engaged in something, you want to keep doing it, and you get really good at it and get better at it. So that's something I think we've really tried to do, is try to help educators see and parents see that learning doesn't always have to feel like this rote, now it's learning time, we're going to do some drill worksheets, because that's not usually how people even learn best. If you think of something that you like to do, it's not something that you feel like you have to do.
So Tim,
Some of my best days in the work that I'm privileged to do in the community in which I work is sort of having the afternoon to go and spend in our after-school program with kids who are in elementary school, and going in for the kickball game, and I leave those days feeling like I could use a little bit more of this in my life, just because there is so much pressure that comes with what it means to be an adult and get things done. And just the exuberance and the connection that you feel with the kids that we serve, there's nothing quite like it. It really is quite unfortunate that we find ourselves at a place where those things are becoming less valued because they don't explicitly contribute to things that we have to be counting.
Yeah, Peter, we need to create these opportunities at home as well, not just at school. So we need parents to buy into this idea of nurturing play. And so, parents blame educators, educators blame parents, both blame screens.
Yes.
Where are you on this idea of screen time? Because I know backstage you were saying some stuff that was a little interesting and a little bit outside, the cliche views on this. Mm-hmm. And just more generically, how do parents create home environments that nurture play?
Yeah, I think that I think part of it is that the first step is that parents have to understand the value of real play. And that's what we've kind of all been talking about. Mm-hmm. The messages just aren't out there that are leading adults to understand the value of child-led play. All the messages are about doing well in school, getting high test scores, and so on and so forth. We have, in this country, and in fact other countries too, turned childhood from a period that used to be thought of as a joyful period of play. Not always joyful, painful, boredom too, right? And a little bullying and stuff like that.
All of it.
You develop some grit and you develop some stamina and learn to do deal with those things. We've turned childhood from that to a period of resume building. And parents think they have to be behind that resume building. And play doesn't go on a resume. If you're on a sports team or if you're taking some kind of a class, that might go on a resume. Already, people with just 2, 3-year-olds old, they're already thinking about getting that kid into college, God forbid, you know. And that's not the way we have to think about childhood. That puts way too much stress on children, and that is, children are not designed to go that way. My research I'm not going to go into detail about my research, but my research has shown that kids who have a lot of free play, who don't do a lot of these things, they get into colleges very well, and they are more inclined to be successful as adults. We've got to convince parents of that, but we've got to first convince the people who convince parents. We have to convince the pediatricians of it. We have to convince the schools of it. You know, educators should be more than people who are trying to squeeze high test scores out of the kids. Educators should be people who are thinking about the long-term best interests of children. And that means they maybe have to educate parents to some degree. But the first step is the educators have to understand the value of play.
And yet there does seem to be an increasing understanding. Allison, maybe you can speak to some of the research that we were talking about earlier about homework, and that there are cutbacks for good reason.
Yeah, John Hattie, if you're familiar at all with his research, does remarkable research that you can't argue with, that basically says there is zero impact of homework on a child's growth and education. And so why are we doing so much assigning of homework? And so when we opened this up at our school and really looked into John Hattie's research and a bunch of other research articles about it, everything pretty much said the same thing. And teachers said, well, parents want it. The parents want it. So we had to really try and convince the parents why we were cutting back on our homework policy. And we got pushback for sure at first. But I think, the overall recommendation was, that a lot of these research articles said was, 10 minutes per the child's grade, if you're going to give homework at all. But, we try and assign homework that sounds more like, go explore, and people don't like that very much. I don't know why.
When you said parents want it, it just reminded me of an experience I had. I have a son who's 25, and I remember he was in a preschool program, and the parents were up in arms about not having homework at preschool.
Oh my goodness.
Serious. And I remember what the teacher did, and it was masterful. She called for a parent meeting, and we had a meeting, and she brought us in the room, and she gave us, she broke the group into 2, and she gave us a sheet of paper where we were to color an apple. That was the assignment, to color an apple and to think about, all of the words that come to mind as you're coloring an apple. And then she brought out a real live apple that we got to cut. And the difference in what we were able to say and generate around an experience that was authentic. It was connected to, the object of an apple in a very real way. Suddenly the parents were just like, okay, I get it. Because they were at odds with, she was a teacher who had an approach that was very much child-directed in this idea of exploring. And it was a center, it wasn't a high end. I wasn't off in some kind of, get me $50,000 to get my kid in a preschool. It wasn't that. We're, middle-class family working. I was a working mom, just finished graduate school. But it stuck with me because what it said was, creating authentic learning opportunities are deeply, the learning that you gain is so much deeper than some of the superficial, like, let's do it to keep somebody busy, but what am I really getting from it? And And again, the re-education process and how we make these things more explicit for parents so that they can then demand different, because teachers operate in a political structure. Many, many teachers are dying to want to be able to approach how they're working with children in ways that differ from what standards around, again, the quantification of learning dictate. Our ability to change the narrative for teachers requires activity on our part as consumers of education to shift that.
How do you, as we get older, Melissa, you and I were talking about some of the high school curriculum that involves collaborative or experiential learning, which is sort of an outgrowth of play. How do you see that going into schools? Allison, feel free to jump in terms of not just kids playing imaginarily on the ground, but bringing that into the curriculum a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just like we were talking about before, getting the kids to actually live the life like an actual scientist or researcher would, right? Going on field trips and actually doing the experiments and making that the learning feel playful, because a lot of scientists and they will describe their work as playful.
I think that it's impossible to overemphasize how valuable imaginative play is for young children. Young children, I've talked to anthropologists throughout the world, children aged 3 to 6 or so, spend enormous amounts of time at pretend play. They're imagining themselves being adults, doing these kinds of things, and that's how they practice being adults in a certain sense. And so the idea that early education should be a place where children can really exercise their imaginations. After all, imagination underlies all higher order thinking, all deductive reasoning, all hypothetical reasoning. All of our ability to plan depends upon imagination, our ability to think about things that aren't being present, to think about things that don't currently exist but maybe could exist. And what would happen if this were true? Children are practicing that all the time, and that in my mind is the ideal.
Well, thank you so much, each and every one of you on the panel, Allison, Tammy, Dr. Gray, all of you, and Melissa especially for helping convene. Totally insightful. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me, and obviously we'll continue the conversation.
Thank you everyone for being here.